In the stillness of the 14th century, when church bells rang to mark the rhythm of daily life, and Europe believed itself safe within its walls of tradition and faith, a shadow began to move silently across the earth. It was not an army, nor a kingdom, nor a storm. It was something far more terrifying, something invisible, merciless, and unstoppable. It was the Black Death, the plague that would reduce the population of Europe by half, burn entire cities into silence, and leave behind a scar so deep that it would shape the course of history forever. Imagine for a moment the sound of distant bells tolling in the night. They do not announce celebration, nor call to prayer. They mark death. Every strike is for another soul lost. Every echo is a reminder that life itself is being consumed. This was the soundtrack of Europe in 1347, a continent suffocating under the weight of its own fear. The Black Death did not arrive suddenly like a thunderclap. Its roots stretched back to the great trade routes of Asia, the arteries of commerce that carried silk, spices, and stories across deserts and seas. Along these routes, nestled in the fur of rats and the blood of fleas, the seeds of destruction were carried westward. In the bustling Mongol cities, whispers began of a strange sickness, people dying within days, their bodies darkened with swellings, their coughs dripping blood. Armies collapsed before battles were even fought. Entire villages vanished in silence. Yet merchants pressed onward, caravans moved, and ships sailed, carrying not only goods, but death itself. By 1347, a fleet of Genoese trading ships docked in Sicily. But instead of unloading treasures, they brought something far worse. Sailors staggered onto the docks, their bodies covered in blackened buboes, swollen lumps filled with infection. Many collapsed before they could even speak. The plague had arrived in Europe. Panic spread faster than the disease itself. From Sicily, the infection moved north like a wildfire fanned by the winds of trade. Messina, Genoa, Marseille, ports that once thrived on life became gateways of death. Imagine walking through a medieval city as the plague tightened its grip. Streets once filled with the laughter of children and the cries of merchants now echoed with silence, broken only by the creak of death carts. Doors were marked with red crosses, signaling that inside lay entire families already gone. Priests walked with incense, hoping the smoke might drive away the invisible demon. The air was thick with the smell of sickness and fear. People carried flowers pressed to their noses, desperate to mask the stench. The rhyme, "Ring around the rosy," whispered by children centuries later, was born from this horror, a macabre reminder of the flowers, the ashes, and the falling bodies. The symptoms came swiftly and mercilessly. It began with fever and chills, followed by the swelling of buboes, grotesque lumps in the armpits and groin, dark as bruises and painful to the touch. Within days, the body turned black with gangrene. Some coughed blood, their lungs drowning from within. Few survived. Most died screaming, abandoned even by family, left for the grave diggers to claim. In some towns, death claimed so many that there were not enough living to bury the dead. Corpses piled in the streets, mass graves swallowed thousands at a time. The earth itself seemed to choke on the weight of bodies. As the plague spread, so too did madness. Some believed it was God's punishment, a divine wrath for the sins of humanity. Flagellants roamed the countryside, whipping their own backs in penance, hoping to atone for all mankind. Others turned to superstition, burning incense, carrying talismans, or seeking cures in strange concoctions of herbs and mercury. But nothing worked. The doctors of the age, plague doctors with their beaked masks filled with spices, were powerless. Their knowledge was too primitive, their tools too crude. They drained blood, burned herbs, and prayed, but still the plague devoured city after city. The fear fractured society itself. Neighbors turned on neighbors. Families abandoned loved ones. In some towns, Jewish communities were blamed, accused of poisoning wells. Pogroms erupted, thousands slaughtered by mobs seeking someone, anyone, to blame. But the killings did nothing to stop the plague. It raged on, indifferent to hatred or prayer. By the winter of 1348, the Black Death had engulfed nearly all of Europe. Paris, London, Florence, all fell in turn. In Florence alone, 2/3 of the population perished. In London, corpses floated in the Thames as the living struggled to dispose of them. Across Europe, entire villages vanished, fields left untended, harvests rotting where they stood. Hunger joined the plague, and misery became endless. Yet within this darkness, history was being rewritten. The plague shattered the old world. With half the population gone, labor became scarce. Serfs demanded better conditions, wages rose, and the rigid structures of feudalism began to crack. The authority of the church, which had promised protection but delivered only silence, weakened. Faith wavered, and new ideas began to take root. From the ashes of despair, the seeds of change were planted, seeds that would one day bloom into the Renaissance. But in the moment, there was only fear. Imagine standing at the gates of your city, watching carts roll in filled with the dead, hearing the endless tolling of bells, and knowing there is no escape. Imagine the silence of night broken by screams in the distance, and the knowledge that tomorrow it could be your family's turn. This was not just a plague. It was the end of the world, as people knew it. By the time the Black Death began to fade in the early 1350s, Europe was unrecognizable. Somewhere between 75 and 200 million people had died. Half of Europe's population was gone. Entire dynasties had ended, economies had collapsed, and the old order lay in ruins. Yet in that ruin, a strange rebirth awaited. With fewer mouths to feed, survivors inherited wealth and land. With the church weakened, thinkers dared to question. With tradition broken, innovation found room to grow. The Black Death was both destruction and creation, a darkness so profound that it gave birth to light. Centuries later, its echo still haunts us. Every pandemic, every outbreak, every fear of unseen disease carries the memory of that time when death ruled unchecked. The Black Death was not merely a tragedy of the past. It is a warning etched into history, a reminder that civilization, no matter how mighty, is always vulnerable to forces it cannot see. And so, the bells keep tolling, not in Europe of the 14th century, but in our memory, in our collective imagination, in every whispered story that begins with the words, "Once, half of Europe died."